There are places in America where people go to disappear. Not because they're running from the law, not because they're hiding from someone, but because they're searching. Searching for peace, for healing, for enlightenment. High in the shadow of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains sits a tiny town called Crestone, Colorado. Population barely over 100. Yet scattered across this remote valley are Hindu temples, Buddhist stupas, monasteries, meditation retreats, and spiritual sanctuaries. For decades, people from all over the world have come here hoping to start over. Some arrive looking for spiritual awakening. Others arrive trying to escape their past. And sometimes, the past catches up with them. In the summer of 2016, a young mother arrived in Crestone hoping to rebuild her life. Her name was Kristal Anne Reisinger. Friends described her as deeply spiritual. She studied tarot. She explored Buddhism and Hindu philosophy. She believed she had psychic abilities, a gift for seeing beyond the physical world. But Kristal wasn't just searching for enlightenment. She was also searching for sobriety, for stability, for a future she could build for her young daughter. In Crestone, she found work at a small local brewery. She made friends. She immersed herself in the town's spiritual culture. For a while, it looked like she had finally found the place where her life could begin again. But then, something happened. On July 13th, 2016, Kristal Reisinger vanished. No goodbye, no packed bags, no explanation. Her phone was left behind. Her medication was still inside her apartment. And despite the town's tiny population, no one could explain where she had gone. Some people claimed they saw her days later at a full moon drum circle. Others whispered darker rumors. Rumors about drugs. Rumors about violence. Rumors about a man in town with a history of assault. Nearly a decade later, no body has ever been found. No one has ever been arrested. And the strange little spiritual town of Crestone still carries the shadow of one unanswered question. What really happened to Kristal Reisinger? Tonight, we open the file. This is Unsaid Case Files. Before the mystery, before the rumors, before the investigation, there was simply a woman trying to rebuild her life. Kristal Anne Reisinger didn't come from an easy background. Born in Arizona, her childhood was unstable. By the time she was just 15 years old, she had already become a ward of the court, forced to navigate life largely on her own. For a time, she found stability living with the parents of a boyfriend who helped support her through those difficult teenage years. Despite the chaos of her early life, Kristal was intelligent, curious, and deeply introspective. She eventually attended Western State College in Gunnison, Colorado, where she studied psychology and sociology. Friends say Kristal was always searching for deeper meaning. She explored Buddhism, Hindu philosophy, and Native American spiritual traditions. She practiced tarot reading and believed she possessed psychic abilities. Some people found her beliefs unusual, but those closest to her say Kristal simply wanted to understand the world and her place in it. She also became a mother. Her daughter became the center of her life and one of the strongest reasons she wanted to turn things around. But like many people trying to rebuild after hardship, Kristal struggled with substance use. By 2014, she made a decision. She would leave the bigger city life of Denver, Colorado, and move somewhere quieter, somewhere spiritual, somewhere she believed she could heal. That place was Crestone, Colorado, a tiny, remote town in the San Luis Valley that many people described as a spiritual sanctuary. For Kristal Reisinger, it felt like exactly what she needed. But sometimes the places people go searching for peace become the places where they disappear. When Kristal Anne Reisinger arrived in Crestone, Colorado, it must have felt like stepping into a completely different world. The town sits in the San Luis Valley, surrounded by open desert and the towering Sangre de Cristo Mountains. With only a small population, Crestone had developed a reputation as a kind of spiritual crossroads. Scattered around the area were Buddhist retreat centers, Hindu temples, meditation sanctuaries, and monasteries. People from across the country, and even across the world, traveled there searching for enlightenment. For someone like Kristal, the town seemed almost destined. She quickly became part of the small community. Kristal found work at the Crestone Brewing Company, a popular gathering place for locals and visitors. Friends remember her as charismatic, talkative, and deeply interested in spiritual conversations. She read tarot cards. She spoke about energy and intuition. Some said she believed she had psychic abilities, the ability to sense things others couldn't. In a town like Crestone, that didn't seem unusual. But life in Crestone wasn't always peaceful. Behind the spiritual retreats and quiet mountain views, there were also whispers of another side of the community: drugs, transient visitors, people passing through who didn't always leave much of a trace. Still, Kristal appeared hopeful. She was trying to stay sober, trying to build a life she could be proud of, trying to create a future she could share with her daughter. For a while, it seemed like things might actually be working out. Until the summer of 2016, because sometime in July of that year, something in Kristal's life changed. And within days, she would be gone. By the summer of 2016, life in Crestone, Colorado had become routine for Kristal Anne Reisinger. She was living in a small apartment in the center of town, the kind of place where neighbors know each other, where everyone passes through the same few streets, the same cafes, the same gathering spots. But sometime around July 13th, 2016, that routine suddenly stopped. Kristal was seen at her apartment that day. After that, no one could say for certain where she went. Days passed, and in a town as small as Crestone, people notice when someone disappears. It was Kristal's landlord, Era McDonald, who eventually raised the alarm. When Kristal hadn't been seen for an extended period of time, McDonald contacted authorities. Investigators entered Kristal's apartment to check on her. What they found immediately raised questions. Kristal's cell phone was still inside. So was her medication. Her personal belongings appeared untouched. There were no signs she had packed up or prepared to leave. For investigators, this was the first troubling clue. Most people who leave town take the basics with them: a phone, medication, some kind of personal items. But Kristal had left everything behind, which suggested something unsettling. Either she planned to return very quickly, or she never intended to leave at all. And yet, despite the quiet streets of Crestone and the small number of residents, no one could clearly explain what happened to her after that day. But soon, rumors would begin spreading through town. Rumors that Kristal may have been seen again, days after she supposedly disappeared. As news spread that Kristal Anne Reisinger had disappeared, something unusual began to surface in Crestone, Colorado. Several people claimed they had seen her. Not on July 13th, the last confirmed day she was known to be at her apartment, but days later. According to multiple residents, Kristal may have attended a full moon drum circle gathering on July 18th, 2016. These drum circles were a common event in Crestone. Under the light of the full moon, people from the community would gather outside, playing drums, sharing food, meditating, and celebrating the spiritual energy many believed surrounded the valley. It wasn't unusual for dozens of people to attend, and in that kind of setting, it would have been easy for someone to blend into the crowd. Some witnesses insisted they saw Kristal there. They claimed she appeared normal, relaxed, talking with others. But investigators faced a problem. None of those sightings could be confirmed. There were no photos, no video, and no clear timeline of exactly who she was with that night. In a small town, memories can blur together, especially after rumors start spreading. So investigators were left with a question. Were these sightings real? Or were they simply the result of confusion? Stories growing larger as they passed from one person to another. If Kristal truly attended that drum circle on July 18th, then she survived 5 days longer than originally believed. But if those sightings were wrong, then whatever happened to Kristal Reisinger likely happened much earlier, possibly much closer to home. And as investigators began digging deeper into Kristal's life in Crestone, one name started coming up again and again. As investigators began looking deeper into the disappearance of Kristal Anne Reisinger, they started examining one of the most important clues in any missing person case: the final people who had contact with her. In a small town like Crestone, Colorado, that list was not very long, but one detail quickly raised concern. According to people close to the investigation, the last known phone call made to Kristal came from a man who lived in the area, a man with a troubling past. Several sources claimed this individual had a criminal history involving drugging and assaulting victims. The information immediately caught the attention of investigators. If Kristal spoke with him shortly before she vanished, then he could potentially be the last person who knew where she was. But small towns come with complicated social circles. People know each other. Rumors travel quickly. And not every allegation can be proven. Authorities have never publicly named this individual as a suspect. They have never charged anyone in connection with Kristal's disappearance. Still, the rumors surrounding that final phone call spread throughout Crestone. Some residents believed someone in town knew more than they were saying. Others believed Kristal may have gotten involved with the wrong people. but without physical evidence, without witnesses who could clearly place her somewhere after July 13th. The investigation began to stall, and as months slowly turned into years, the mystery of what happened to Kristal Reisinger only grew deeper. As the disappearance of Kristal Anne Reisinger stretched from days into weeks, investigators began treating the case with increasing urgency. In a town as small as Crestone, Colorado, a person doesn't usually vanish without someone noticing something. The Saguache County Sheriff's Office began interviewing residents, speaking with Kristal's friends, neighbors, and coworkers. They searched areas surrounding the town, the desert terrain, nearby trails, and isolated roads that wind through the San Luis Valley. But the geography of the area created a major challenge. Crestone sits in a remote region surrounded by miles of open land. There are countless places where someone could disappear without leaving obvious evidence. Investigators also began looking closely at Kristal's lifestyle and the people she spent time with. They examined phone records. They tried to piece together the last hours of her known movements. But the deeper they looked, the more complicated the story became. Different witnesses told slightly different versions of events. Some claimed to have seen Kristal after the day she was believed to have disappeared. Others insisted she had been struggling in the days leading up to July 13th. Without a confirmed timeline, without physical evidence pointing to what happened, the case quickly became one of the most frustrating types investigators face. A disappearance with more questions than answers. And as the investigation continued, authorities began to consider a disturbing possibility. Kristal Reisinger may not have simply left Crestone. She may have never left the town at all. For the first year after Kristal Anne Reisinger disappeared, investigators held on to a small possibility. Maybe she had left Crestone, Colorado, on her own. Maybe she had decided to start over somewhere else. But as time passed, that possibility began to fade. Kristal had left behind too many important things: her phone, her medication, and most importantly, she had left behind the people who cared about her, including her young daughter. For investigators, that kind of sudden disappearance without contact rarely ends well. By 2018, authorities made a major announcement. Both the Saguache County Sheriff's Office and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation publicly stated that they believed foul play was involved in Kristal's disappearance. The case was no longer considered a missing person investigation alone. It was now being treated as a potential homicide investigation. But even with that shift in focus, investigators still faced a critical problem. They had no body, no confirmed crime scene, and no physical evidence tying anyone to a crime. Without those elements, building a criminal case becomes incredibly difficult. Still, investigators continued working leads, and the mystery surrounding Kristal's disappearance began attracting national attention. Soon, the story of the missing woman from Crestone would spread far beyond the quiet valley where she had last been seen. And with that attention, new theories and new questions would begin to emerge. As the mystery surrounding Kristal Anne Reisinger continued to grow, The case slowly began reaching audiences far beyond the quiet streets of Crestone, Colorado. True crime investigators, journalists, and podcast creators started taking interest in the story. One of the biggest surges of attention came when the case was featured on the popular true crime podcast, Up and Vanished. The podcast examined the strange circumstances surrounding Kristal's disappearance and the unique environment of Crestone itself. Listeners around the world suddenly heard about the tiny spiritual town where a young mother had vanished without a trace. With that attention came new tips. Some people contacted investigators claiming they had information about what might have happened. Others came forward with stories about individuals in the area who had allegedly behaved suspiciously around the time Kristal disappeared. But attention can be both helpful and complicated. Some leads were useful. Others were rumors repeated so many times that it became difficult to separate fact from speculation. Investigators had to carefully examine every piece of information, every phone call, every message, every claim from someone who believed they knew something about the night Kristal vanished. Yet, despite the renewed interest in the case, the central mystery remained unchanged. No confirmed sightings, no confirmed evidence, and no answers about where Kristal Reisinger had gone. But years later, one discovery near Crestone would briefly reignite hope that the case might finally be solved. Years passed after the disappearance of Kristal Anne Reisinger, and the case slowly grew colder. But in 2022, something happened that briefly reignited hope for answers. Human bones were discovered near a campground outside Crestone, Colorado. In a case where no remains had ever been found, the discovery immediately caught the attention of investigators. Authorities began examining the bones to determine whether they could belong to the missing woman. For Kristal's family and those who had followed the case for years, the news was both terrifying and hopeful. If the remains belonged to Kristal, it might finally reveal what happened to her. But after careful examination, investigators reached a different conclusion. The bones were not connected to the case. Authorities determined they were actually cremated human remains that had been scattered in the area by a family. The discovery was unrelated to Kristal's disappearance. The investigation returned to where it had been before. No confirmed crime scene, no confirmed suspects, no physical evidence explaining what happened in July of 2016. Still, investigators refused to close the case. And in 2025, nearly 9 years after Kristal vanished, authorities made a surprising move that suggested the mystery might not be as cold as it once appeared. Nearly a decade after Kristal Anne Reisinger vanished, the mystery surrounding her disappearance still lingers over Crestone, Colorado. But in August of 2025, investigators made a move that reminded everyone the case was far from forgotten. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation, working alongside the Saguache County Sheriff's Office, conducted a targeted search in Crestone connected to Kristal's disappearance. 4 human remains detection dogs were brought in to search a specific location investigators believed could be linked to the case. The operation was conducted quietly, and when it ended, Authorities revealed very little about what had been found. They confirmed the search had taken place, but no details about the results were released. Investigators said the case remains active and ongoing, which raises an unsettling possibility. After all these years, someone may still know exactly what happened to Kristal Reisinger. Somewhere in the small spiritual town where she came searching for a new life, there may still be people carrying secrets. Secrets about the night she disappeared. Secrets that could finally reveal what happened in July of 2016. Until those answers are found, the disappearance of Kristal Reisinger remains one of Colorado's most haunting unsolved mysteries. A young mother who came to a place of peace and was never seen again. The disappearance of Kristal Anne Reisinger remains unsolved. Nearly a decade later, investigators with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation continue searching for answers about what happened in Crestone, Colorado, in July of 2016. Someone, somewhere, knows something. And one piece of information, one detail that may seem small, could be the key to finally solving this case. If you have any information related to Kristal Reisinger's disappearance, authorities encourage you to contact the Colorado Bureau of Investigation or the Saguache County Sheriff's Office. Even the smallest tip could help bring answers to a family that has waited far too long. If you want to help keep cases like this alive, make sure you follow, subscribe, and share Unsaid Case Files wherever you listen to podcasts. Your support helps bring attention to the stories that still need answers. Until next time, I'm Johnny Black, and this has been Unsaid Case Files. Because sometimes the most important truths are the ones that remain unsaid.